My husband took everything in the divorce. He had no idea what he was really taking, and I hope you enjoy this story. I talked to the lawyer, Wade said. He dropped his keys on the kitchen counter. They made a sharp clink against the formica. The fairest way is I take the house and the vehicles. You take the joint savings. And you keep Levi. I do not want to fight over the kid. I pressed my hands flat against the counter behind my back. The surface felt cold, smooth. I did not remember stepping backward. Wade held a yellow legal pad. Blue ink filled the page in 2 neat columns. Bullet points. He had actually sat down at the dining table, uncapped his pen, and written down our entire life. Upstairs, the television murmured. Levi was watching a cartoon on mute. The stone fireplace in the living room hummed a low, steady sound. The smell of roasted chicken drifted from the oven. It had been roasting for 2 hours. Neither of us had remembered to turn the dial. The taste of my afternoon coffee sat bitter and stale on my tongue. I am 42 years old. I work as a surgical nurse at the county hospital. I have seen men bleed out on operating tables, and I have held the hands of mothers who just lost their entire world. But looking at Wade right now, reading his neat bullet points, I did not know what to say. Okay, I said. Wade looked up from his legal pad. He stared at me. He waited. He tapped his pen against the paper. Do you want me to react differently? I asked. I just thought you would have more to say, Wade told me. You made your decision, I said. I understand. Wade lowered his voice. He used the tone he saved for moments when he did not like being read by other people. This is not about you, Faye. This is about me needing something else. I know, I said. He looked back down at his notes. He read off the rest of his demands. The Ford truck, the work van, the joint checking account. He pointed out that 62% of the money in that account came from his paychecks. He had done the math. He had printed out the bank statements. He was treating our marriage like a bankruptcy sale. He wanted the heavy things, the expensive things, the things he could show off to his friends at the bar. Then he cleared his throat. Oh, and the kid. You want to raise him, you go ahead. I do not want to fight over that. That? A floorboard creaked above us. A tiny fragile sound. Someone stepping lightly and then freezing in place. I did not turn my head to look at the dark staircase. I knew exactly who was there. My 8-year-old son was standing in the shadows. He was listening to his father. If I turned around, Wade would turn around too. Letting Levi hear this negotiation was one thing. Letting my son know his father just called him, that was another. My jaw ached. I had been grinding my teeth for 3 solid hours. Years ago, my father stood on his porch and told me something important. He said I never had to ask permission to love his land. I did not understand what he meant at the time. I thought I understood it now. I looked straight into Wade's eyes. I did not blink. All right, I said. You can keep all of those things. Wade blinked twice. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. You do not want to argue about any of it. No, I told him. I picked up my cold coffee cup. I set it in the stainless steel sink next to his unwashed mug from this morning. I walked past my husband. I made sure my shoulder did not brush against his arm. I climbed the dark stairs. The hallway was empty. Levi's door was cracked open. The pale blue light from his game console had been turned off. I stood outside his room for a long minute. I listened to the even rhythm of his breathing. Then I walked down the hall to my own bedroom. I lay down on the mattress. I stared up at the plaster ceiling. Wade was taking everything that looked good on paper. That was fine. For the first time in 8 months, my chest did not feel tight. The next morning, I parked my car outside the medical center. My shift started in 15 minutes. I did not get out of the vehicle right away. The heater was running full blast, but the steering wheel still felt like ice under my fingers. I pulled out my phone. I scrolled down my contact list until I reached the letter N, Norman Hast, the office number for my father's attorney. I rested the phone on my lap. I did not press call. A sharp rap sounded against the glass. I jumped in my seat. Donna was standing outside my door. My best friend had her thick wool scarf wrapped tight around her neck. Her breath plumed like white smoke in the freezing air. Her heavy winter boots scraped against the asphalt. I rolled down the window. The bitter winter wind rushed inside the cabin. A neighbor's car engine sputtered to life across the parking lot. The sharp smell of morning exhaust filled my nose. "What are you doing sitting out here?" Donna asked. "Just thinking," I said. Donna leaned closer. She studied my face. She reads people better than anyone I know. "It happened, did it not?" she asked. "Yes," I told her. We let the silence sit between us. The idling engine of my car hummed a steady beat. Donna did not push for details. She just waited. "I am fine," I said. Donna frowned. "You are never fine when you say you are fine." I let out a small laugh. It was enough to make Donna's shoulders drop a fraction of an inch. "I have a plan," I said. "What kind of plan?" Donna asked. "Can I tell you later?" I asked. Donna looked at me for 3 more seconds. Then she nodded slowly. We walked into the hospital together. I worked my entire 8-hour shift. I checked charts. I prepped patients for surgery. I cleaned instruments. I did not make a single mistake. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I went into the empty break room. I dialed Norman's number. I left a message with his receptionist. At 8:30 that night, I pushed open the door to Levi's bedroom. I did not turn on the overhead light. Pace, the street lamp outside cast a long pale yellow stripe across the wooden floorboards. The room smelled like dried grass and baby shampoo. Levi was breathing in a slow, steady rhythm. I looked at the small bookshelf next to his bed. My father's old baseball cap sat on the top shelf. It was faded navy blue. The flat brim was worn raw at the edges. Levi slept on his right side. His small hand was curled tight around something. I stepped closer to the bed. I looked down at his fingers. He was holding a small, smooth river stone. I recognized that stone instantly. He had pulled it from the shallow creek that ran through my father's property in Letcher County. He opened his eyes. He was not fully awake yet. He blinked up at me. Mom, Levi whispered. "Yes," I said. "Go back to sleep, Mom." His voice stayed quiet. He sounded like he was weighing his words carefully. "Are we going to Grandpa Earl's place this weekend?" I thought about the dark staircase from last night. He had heard everything his father said. He did not ask if Wade and I were getting a divorce. He did not ask where he was going to live. He asked about the farm. "We will go this weekend," I told him. Levi gave a tiny nod. He closed his eyes again. His fingers tightened around the smooth river stone. I stood by his bed a little longer. I looked out his window. Far away past the dark line of the hills, a cluster of yellow lights glowed against the night sky. A construction crew was working late. They were close to the Corbett property line. I remembered a phone call from last month. Norman Hast had called me at the hospital. He had told me some companies were surveying land in that area. He had said we needed to talk. I had told him I would deal with it later. Later had arrived. The winter wind rattled the loose window pane. Levi let out a soft snore. He was completely asleep now. I watched the construction lights blink in the distance. Wade thought he had won. He thought he had taken everything of value we owned. I needed to see Norman tomorrow morning before I signed a single piece of paper. The wall clock in the office ticked a heavy rhythmic beat. I sat in a worn leather chair across from Norman Hast. His law practice sat right in the middle of downtown Harlan. The room smelled like decades of old paper and the sharp bite of dark roast coffee. A tired air conditioner hummed a dry note from the corner. Norman was 63 years old. He wore wire-rimmed glasses that always slid down the bridge of his nose. He sat behind a wide mahogany desk that took up too much space in the small room. Norman opened a thin folder. The cover was dark green. My father's handwriting stretched across the label in black ink. It read, Corbett GST Levi A. Dunmore. He did not start talking right away. Norman poured a cup of coffee from a thermos and pushed it across the desk toward me. He waited for me to take a sip. "No," I told him. "Not even Wade," Norman asked. "Especially not Wade," I said. Norman gave a slow nod. He turned the first page of the document. 3 years ago, when your father passed away, I explained this to you once. But you were actively grieving back then. I want to go over the details again so we are absolutely clear. I listened to his voice. It was steady and calm. Norman explained the mechanics of the trust slowly. He avoided heavy legal vocabulary because he had worked with regular Kentucky folks long enough to know how to speak to them. It was a generation-skipping trust. The asset was 85 acres of land up in Letcher County. It included the old farmhouse and all the mineral rights. My father had left it straight to his grandson. He bypassed my generation completely. The purpose was partly to save on estate taxes, but mostly Earl Corbett wanted to make sure that piece of land reached the right hands safely. Norman pointed to a paragraph near the bottom of the page. The trustee is the person who manages the trust until Levi turns 25 years old. And according to the specific terms, Earl wrote into this document, he wanted the trustee to be the person closest to Levi, the person with primary legal responsibility for the boy. Put simply, the legal guardian of Levi becomes the sole trustee of the trust. I traced the edge of my coffee cup with my thumb. I did not interrupt him. Right now, both you and Wade are joint legal guardians by the default rules of your marriage, Norman continued. In a divorce, whoever gets primary guardianship becomes the sole trustee. I had understood this when I first visited his office after my dad died. So you are telling me this again for a reason. Norman looked at me over his wire-rimmed glasses. What exactly were you thinking when Wade told you he did not want Levi? I was thinking that my husband did not know you were about to ask me that question, I said. A long silence settled over the room. The old wall clock kept ticking. Norman nodded again. He turned to the second page in the green folder. There is something else, Norman said. A representative contacted me last month. They are from Appalachian Solar Partners. They want to buy an easement on the western slope of the farm, and they also submitted a contingency offer for a full purchase of the property. I have not given them an answer because I needed to speak with you first. What is the price? I asked. Norman slid a second piece of paper across the desk. The easement is $85,000 upfront. The purchase option is $340,000 for the entire 85 acres, and they want an answer before the end of April. The divorce hearing was scheduled for the last week of March. I placed my coffee cup carefully on the wooden desk. I should have paid closer attention to the dates. I did not. I was too focused on the numbers. But the timeline was suddenly the most important piece of the entire puzzle. I walked out of Norman's office 20 minutes later. I stood on the downtown sidewalk in the bitter February cold. The wind cut right through my coat. I needed to see exactly how Wade was playing his side of the board before I made my next move. That evening, Wade came home much later than usual. He walked through the front door with a different kind of energy. He was smiling. He placed his phone face down on the kitchen island. He tossed a cardboard box of lukewarm pizza on the dining table for Levi, then walked straight into the master bedroom and closed the door. I stayed in the kitchen. I wiped down the counters with a damp cloth. I could hear his voice through the thin, dry wall. He was talking on the phone. His tone was upbeat and bright. He was talking to Tricia. They were celebrating. He told her he had spoken to his lawyer and everything was going smoother than he ever expected. I heard her voice buzz through the phone speaker. She asked him when they could move into the house. Wade laughed softly. He told her they could move in by late March if there were no unexpected hiccups. Levi sat at the kitchen table. He was eating a slice of cold pepperoni pizza all by himself. The television murmured through the wall from Wade's bedroom. The smell of stale grease hung in the air. Levi looked at the closed bedroom door. Then he looked over at me. His small shoulders were tense. "Eat your dinner, buddy," I told him. Levi took another bite. He did not say a single word. The next afternoon, I sat in my car in the parking lot of the medical center. My Friday shift had just ended. The winter sky was already turning dark at 5 o'clock. The yellow parking lot lights flickered on above me. A thin layer of condensation blurred the windshield. I held my phone in my right hand. Greta Hollins's name glowed on the screen waiting for me to hit the call button. A neighbor's car engine rumbled to life a few spaces away. The icy wind whistled through the worn rubber seals of my car doors. My heart was beating in a slow, deliberate rhythm. It felt exactly like the moments before I scrubbed in for a complicated surgery. My fingers felt numb against the cold steering wheel. The cabin smelled like old plastic and the harsh antibacterial soap I used at the hospital. My mouth was completely dry. I had been sitting in the driver's seat for 20 minutes. I had two paths laid out in front of me, and I was weighing every single consequence. The first path was loud. I could call Greta. I could tell her to fight. She was a good attorney. She would file injunctions and contest the assets. We would fight over the suburban house, the Ford truck, and the joint checking account. Wade would fight back with everything he had. The battle would drag on for months. It might take a full year. We would drain our savings to pay the lawyers. Levi would have to listen to his parents tear each other apart over the dinner table every single night. In the end, I might win half the equity in a house I no longer wanted to live in, a vehicle I did not need, and a son who had absorbed entirely too much collateral damage. The second path was quiet. I could give Wade exactly what he demanded. Every single item on his yellow legal pad. I could offer zero resistance. I could pack up Levi's clothes, move into a small apartment, and start over from scratch. And I could wait. I was not waiting because I was weak. I was waiting because I knew something the men in the house did not. I pressed the call button. The line rang twice before Greta answered. Faye, Greta said, I just finished preparing the counter documents. We are going to challenge the house and the savings account. Do not do that, I told her. Do not do what Greta asked. Do not object to anything, I said. Give it all to him. Greta went completely silent on the other end of the line. I heard her chair squeak as she leaned forward. Are you being serious right now? The house, the truck, the van, the accounts, I listed them off. I will keep my own nursing paychecks and I will take sole custody of Levi. That is the entire deal. Faye, please listen to me, Greta said. Her voice tightened with frustration. I can secure at least half the equity. You are walking away from your own money. I know you can get it, I replied. I am asking you not to do it. This is a massive mistake, the attorney warned me. That might be true, I said. But it is my mistake to make. Another long silence stretched across the cellular connection. Do you know something that I do not know? Greta asked softly. I looked out the misty windshield. The yellow parking lot lights hummed. A single dry leaf blew across the cold asphalt. I did not answer her question right away. Wade looked at our life, and he only saw the painted walls of the house. He saw the engine of the truck. He saw the printed numbers on the bank statements. He did not see the piece of paper resting inside the green folder on Norman Hast's desk. He did not know that 85 acres of mineral rights in Letcher County were a completely different reality than a mortgaged suburban house in Harlan. Most importantly, my husband had used his own voice to say he did not want Levi. He had called his own son a thing. He had made his grand decision without having any idea what he was actually giving away. I know that my father was a much smarter man than I ever realized, I finally told her. What does that mean? Greta asked. Draft the papers, Greta, I instructed. Write them up exactly the way Wade requested. I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. I reached forward and turned the ignition key. The engine roared to life. My headlights snapped on, cutting a bright path through the gathering darkness. My father did not leave that land to me. He left it to Levi, and he knew exactly who was going to protect Levi when the time came. I pulled out of the parking space and steered toward the highway. For the first time in 8 long months, there was no heavy knot sitting in the center of my chest. Greta would draft the surrender papers, and nobody knew that was the final move I needed to make. The fluorescent lights in Greta Holland's office hummed a constant annoying note above my head. 2 neat stacks of paper sat on the dark mahogany desk between us. The sharp smell of fresh printer ink filled the small room. Out in the reception area, the rapid clatter of a keyboard echoed through the open door. Greta rested her hands on the top stack. She had prepared both versions just like I knew she would. The thick stack on the left was the battle plan. It contained all the legal motions to contest the house, the vehicles, and the savings accounts. The thin stack on the right was exactly what I had asked her to draft over the phone. The surrender. I know I told her before she could even open her mouth. That sentence does not comfort me, Greta replied. Her voice held the steady, careful rhythm of a person delivering bad news. Greta, I said, how many cases have you actually seen where a client fought for absolutely everything and won absolutely everything? The attorney picked up a silver pen. She tapped the metal tip against the desk. They do not win everything, but they win their fair share. And how long does it take them? I asked. And how much money do they spend on billable hours? And how many terrible things do their children have to hear through the walls before the ink is dry? Greta did not answer me right away. Her eyes flicked toward the door, then back to my face. I am not walking away from this because I am weak, I told her. I am walking away because I am choosing the right battlefield. My lawyer studied me for a long time. The woman had been practicing family law in Harlan County for 15 years. She knew a bluff when she saw one, and she knew I was not bluffing. Slowly, she pushed the thin stack of papers across the polished wood. If you change your mind before Wade signs his name, Greta started to say. I will not change my mind, I interrupted. And the custody arrangement for Levi Greta continued tapping a specific page. Are you absolutely certain you want to push for sole custody, not joint custody, sole custody? I confirmed. Wade already stated he does not want to fight over it. He had used the word fight, as if raising his own son was a chore he wanted to avoid. You are asking your husband to sign a voluntary parental custody waiver, Greta explained. Her silver pen pointed directly at the bold print on the signature page. Once a document like this is filed with the court, it is incredibly difficult to reopen the matter. He gives up his default rights. I know exactly what it means, I said. I picked up the pen she offered me. The metal casing felt cold against my skin. I signed my name on the applicant line. The blue ink flowed smooth and dark across the thick white paper. We packaged the documents in a heavy manila envelope and handed them to her assistant to send across town to Wade's attorney. Early Saturday morning, Levi and I drove 35 minutes north out of Harlan and crossed into Letcher County. The narrow dirt road wound its way up into the hills. The winter trees were stripped completely bare. Their dark branches looked like curved spines against the pale morning sky. Loose gravel and red clay crunched loud under the tires of my car. Levi sat up perfectly straight in the passenger seat. He pressed his face close to the cold glass of the window. The crisp thin air of the high country seeped through the vents. It smelled like dry pine needles and old earth. We rounded the final bend. The Corbett farm appeared exactly where it had always been. The small wooden farmhouse sat quiet and still. A crooked wooden fence lined the front yard. My father had built that fence with his own hands back in 1987. A massive white oak tree stood tall near the old stone well. Levi unbuckled his seatbelt before the car even rolled to a complete stop. He pushed the heavy door open and ran straight toward the wooden fence. I stood by the car door and watched him go. Then I turned my head and looked toward the western ridge. About 400 yards away, a bright flash of color caught my eye. A brand new wooden survey stake was driven deep into the frozen ground. The top was painted neon orange. Then I spotted another one, and another. A long straight line of them marched across the slope of the hill. Norman Hast had warned me about this. They wanted the western section first. The slope faced directly south, which made it the perfect angle for solar panels. I walked across the dry winter grass and joined my son. I looked up into the thick branches of the white oak. A rusted iron nail still stuck out from the largest limb. A frayed piece of rope hung from the metal left over from a hammock that had rotted away decades ago. Your grandfather used to hang a hammock right there, I said. Did Grandpa Earl come out here a lot? Levi asked. Every single Saturday morning, I told him. He never missed a weekend in 40 years. Levi reached out and touched the rough bark of the tree. He tilted his head back and looked toward the western ridge. What are those orange sticks for Hmong people came out here to survey the land? I said. Do they want to buy our property? The 8-year-old asked. They asked about it, I said. I paused and looked at the orange stakes. But this is your land. Nobody can buy it unless you want to sell it to them. Levi turned around and looked at me. His brown eyes went wide. Mine, yours, I confirmed, according to the legal papers your grandfather left behind. The little boy processed this information. He gave a slow, serious nod. It was the exact kind of nod an 8-year-old gives when he hears something incredibly important and decides to guard it. We walked up the creaky wooden steps and pushed open the front door of the farmhouse. The hinges let out a long, dry squeal. Inside the air was completely still. It smelled heavily of old cedar wood, dried lavender, and years of settling dust. A faded cardboard shoebox sat directly in the center of the kitchen table. My father's old coffee mug rested right beside it. The box had been sitting in that exact spot since the week he passed away. I stepped across the scuffed floorboards and picked the box up. The cardboard felt soft at the corners. It was much heavier than I remembered. I pulled the lid off. Old photographs, faded vehicle registrations, and ancient grocery receipts from the 1990s filled the space. Tucked all the way at the very bottom was a sealed white envelope. My father's handwriting was scrawled across the front. It said Fay read when needed. I had not opened that envelope in 3 years. I placed it gently back into the box and pressed the lid down tight. It was not time yet. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I pulled it out and read a text message from Greta. Wade's lawyer had received the paperwork. On Tuesday afternoon, we all gathered in Greta's conference room. Wade sat on the opposite side of the long glass table. He grabbed a pen and began signing his name on every single page without a second thought. His attorney, a man named Phil Stanger, who had been handling divorce law in Harlan for 20 solid years, watched him with a deep frown. The quiet room echoed with the sharp click of a ballpoint pen and the steady rustle of thick paper turning. Greta sat perfectly straight in her chair. Her face was as smooth and unreadable as plaster. Wade signed the document, accepting full ownership of the house. He signed a page, taking the truck and the work van. He signed the claim for the joint bank accounts. He did not utter a single word of protest. Then he reached the final document, the voluntary parental custody waiver. Phil Stanger leaned closer to his client. He kept his voice low, but the room was so quiet the words carried easily across the glass table. Mr. Dunmore, this specific paper means Faye gets full sole custody. You are giving up your right to joint custody, and there is no default visitation schedule. If you ever want to change this arrangement later, you will have to petition the court and start completely over. I know, Wade said. Are you absolutely sure about this? Phil asked. I am not here to argue about the kid, Wade told his lawyer. Sign it and we are done. I sat perfectly still and watched my husband. That was the third time he had used a completely neutral term to describe his own flesh and blood. First it was that thing, then the kid. Now argue about the kid. It was never Levi's actual name. Never once. Wade pressed the pen to the signature line. His handwriting was bold and heavy, pressing deep into the paper. It was the exact same confident signature he used when approving massive construction contracts at work. He crossed his letters with sharp, aggressive lines. He did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. He signed the waiver. He dated it. Phil Stanger and Greta Hollins both signed the bottom of the page as official witnesses. The exchange of paper was over in less than 10 minutes. Greta took the heavy stack of documents straight to the county courthouse that very same afternoon. She walked them up to the clerk window herself. The heavy metal stamp came down on the front page. The loud thud echoed off the marble walls of the lobby. The papers were stamped, processed, and recorded permanently into the official county ledger. After Wade and his lawyer packed up their briefcases and walked out the glass doors, Greta let out a long breath. You know, Greta said quietly, I have been doing this for 15 years. I have never seen a divorce settlement where the other side did not fight to win at least one single concession. He got exactly what he wanted, I told her. Did you get what you needed? Greta asked. I picked up my certified copy of the custody waiver. I folded the thick paper precisely in half and slipped it into my dark leather purse. The crisp snap of the magnetic clasp echoed in the quiet room. Ask me that question again at the end of March, I said. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and opened my messages. I typed a single word to Norman Hest. Filed. The legal machinery was finally locked into motion. The path forward only went one way now, and there was absolutely no turning back. Cardboard boxes sat stacked high in the narrow hallway of the house. I had packed up our lives before Wade could bring his own belongings through the front door. I did not want our lives overlapping in those rooms. Levi carried his game console down the stairs, followed by a stack of library books and a plastic bin full of loose Lego bricks. I carried my nursing scrubs, a heavy box of legal documents, my electric tea kettle, and a small stack of framed family photographs. We did not take much. The house echoed when we walked. It felt remarkably empty once the things belonging to a mother and her son were removed. Donna parked her husband's heavy pickup truck in the driveway to help us move. She carried the last box of kitchen supplies out to the truck bed. The cold winter air bit at our exposed hands. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Donna asked. She leaned against the tailgate and crossed her arms. "I am certain," I told her. "Can we at least wait around?" Donna asked. "I really want to look at his face when he walks inside and sees this empty house." "Donna," I said softly. "Okay," my friend sighed. "Okay. I will keep my mouth shut." We drove across town to the new apartment. It sat on the second floor of a 3-story brick building right off Highway 119. The 2-bedroom unit overlooked a cracked asphalt parking lot. It was not pretty. The carpets were an older beige, and the appliances hummed a little too loud, but it was completely clean. I had viewed the unit during my lunch break while Levi was at school, and I had signed the lease that exact same afternoon. That evening, Levi and I sat cross-legged on the carpet. We ate warm cheese pizza straight out of the cardboard delivery box because our small dining table had not been delivered yet. Levi took a bite and looked around the empty living room. He did not complain. "It is smaller than the old house," Levi noted. "It is," I agreed, "but it is much closer to my school," my son added. "That is right," I said. Levi wiped his mouth with a paper napkin. "And we are still going to Grandpa Earl's place on the weekends, right?" "We will go every single week if you want to," I told him. The boy took another bite of pizza. He looked completely satisfied. I set my paper plate down on the carpet. I thought about the man across town. Wade was currently placing Trisha's belongings into the kitchen cabinets I had painted a bright, sunny yellow back in the summer of 2019. I waited for the sting of jealousy or anger to hit me. It never came. The real pain belonged to the years of sleeping in the same bed with a man who no longer looked at me. This was just paperwork finally catching up to reality. On Friday evening, I walked down the short hallway of our new apartment. I stopped in the doorway of Levi's bedroom. He was busy taping printed photographs to his bare wall. He had asked me to print them from my phone before we moved out of the house. They were pictures of the farm, the massive white oak tree, the crooked wooden fence, the small farmhouse looking down the slope of the hill. "Do you like looking at those better than your superhero posters?" I asked from the doorway. Levi did not turn around. He smoothed a piece of clear tape over the corner of a photograph. "Those superhero posters are at Dad's house. This place is mine." "Have you picked out a name for the farm yet?" I asked. Levi stopped moving. He thought about the question. "I just call it Grandpa Earl's place. But the land belongs to you now," I reminded him. "You can give it a brand new name if you want." My son turned around. He looked at the photograph of the great oak tree for a long time. "Corbett Ridge," Levi said. "That is beautiful," I told him. "Grandpa was named Corbett," the boy explained. "Yes, he was," I agreed. I reached out and flicked off the bedroom light switch. I stepped back into the dark hallway and let him sleep. I stood alone in the quiet apartment and smiled. On Monday afternoon, exactly 3 weeks before the final divorce hearing, I sat in Norman Hast's office again. A brand new folder rested in the center of his cluttered desk. The cover was bright white. A navy blue logo was printed neatly across the front. It read Appalachian Solar Partners. Next to the folder, Norman had unrolled a large topographic map of Letcher County. A specific section of land was highlighted in bright yellow marker. The old air conditioner rattled in the corner. Outside the dusty window, heavy supply trucks shifted gears as they rolled through downtown Harlan. A cold winter rain began to tap against the glass. I held a thick offer letter in my hands. The paper was heavy and expensive. The corporate logo at the top was embossed. Norman poured a fresh cup of coffee from his thermos. It smelled much darker and thicker than the blend he brewed last week. I did not accept a cup this time. I brought my own travel mug from the hospital and held it in my lap. Norman tapped a thick finger against the topographic map. He pointed directly at the yellow highlighted section. "Appalachian Solar Partners are developing a massive utility-scale solar farm right along this specific corridor," Norman explained. The Corbett Ridge property sits dead in the center of their planned grid. Without that specific piece of land, the entire project will have to build a very expensive detour. The attorney explained the two options clearly. The first option was a long-term easement. I could allow the company to run their infrastructure across the property for 30 years. The upfront payment for that access was $85,000. We would not have to sell a single inch of the land. The second option was a full purchase. The corporation wanted to buy the entire 85 acres outright. The official offer printed on the heavy paper was $340,000. Norman explained that this was a negotiated offer. It was not the initial low number they had tried to pitch him. They originally offered $280,000, Norman said. Did you suggest they come up to $340,000? I asked. Norman offered a small knowing smile. They need this piece of land far more than they want to admit. And I have been practicing law long enough to know when corporate developers are bluffing. What is their timeline? I asked. They want a final decision before the end of April, the attorney replied. They plan to begin construction in the spring if everything goes smoothly. My court date is the final week of March, I noted. I am well aware of the schedule, Norman said. He paused and adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. The trustee of the trust, once you are officially granted sole legal custody, possesses the authority to sign off on any deal related to the trust assets without needing a single extra legal step. That means the moment the hearing is over, I can sign the papers, I asked. Exactly, Norman said. He slid a third piece of paper across the desk toward me. And there is one more detail. The solar company wants to send a representative to the courthouse on the day of your hearing. They want to be present so that if the deal is confirmed, you can sign the official letter of intent right there on the spot. They know about your court date. They do not know the personal details, but they know there will be a change in guardianship status. I read the name printed on the paper. Dale Fitch, Vice President of Project Development. This executive was going to sit in the back of the courtroom. He would not be there as a witness. He would only be there as an observer waiting to confirm the signature authority of the trustee. He was going to sit in the exact same room as Wade's lawyer. He would be watching when Norman submitted the trust document into the official county record. It would all happen before my soon-to-be ex-husband even realized what was going on. I placed the thick paper down on the desk. The weight of the moment settled over me. It was not a feeling of wild excitement or loud triumph. It was the quiet, solid certainty of a person standing on firm ground. My father had planted that white oak tree back in 1979. He had no idea who he was planting it for at the time. Or perhaps he did know and he simply chose to keep it to himself. He had told me I never had to ask permission to love that land. It was not just about loving the dirt and the trees. It was about protecting it for the next person in line. My father did not know the name of the next person when he spoke those words to me on the porch, but I knew his name. Levi Corbett Dunmore, 8 years old, had named the farm Corbett Ridge and taped a picture of that oak tree right to his bedroom wall. Tell Mr. Fitch that I would like to meet him before the hearing begins, I instructed the attorney. I want to make sure he understands our exact timeline. I will arrange the meeting, Norman promised. I stood up from the leather chair. I picked up the folder Norman had prepared for my records. I looked down at the topographic map one last time. The yellow highlighted area of Corbett Ridge looked small, but it sat right in the heart of a much larger sprawling development zone. Earl would really like this, I said quietly. Norman looked up. Your father liked solar energy. My father liked it when something was being used the right way, I told him. I walked out of the law office and stepped into the freezing rain. The final court date was exactly 3 weeks away. I was not going to tell a single soul about the solar company or the generation skipping trust. The silence was my greatest advantage, and I was going to hold on to it until the very last second. The required mediation session took place exactly 2 weeks before our scheduled court date. We gathered in a small windowless conference room on the second floor of the Harlan County Courthouse. The air inside felt recycled and dry. A single white fluorescent tube flickered slightly near the door. The blank whiteboard on the far wall had ghost images of old schedules smeared across its surface. A plastic pitcher of ice water sat in the center of the imitation wood table, sweating small drops onto the laminate. Greta Hollins sat directly to my right. Her posture was perfectly straight, her hands resting flat on top of her leather briefcase. Across the table, Wade leaned back in his vinyl chair. He looked incredibly comfortable. His shoulders were loose. He had unbuttoned the collar of his dress shirt. He had already signed every single document, giving him everything he wanted, so this morning was nothing more than a formal hurdle for him to clear. His attorney, Phil Stanger, sat next to him, organizing a thick stack of papers with short, sharp movements. The court-appointed mediator was a tired-looking woman with graying hair and thick reading glasses. She cleared her throat and began reading down the official list of divided assets. The suburban house, the Ford truck, the work van, the joint savings and checking accounts, the transfer of the deed, the voluntary waiver of parental custody, sole legal and physical custody of Levi granted to the mother. She read the terms in a flat, monotone voice. There was absolutely nothing new on those pages. Phil Stanger reached up and adjusted his necktie. He looked across the table, his eyes settling firmly on my face. The seasoned lawyer had been navigating messy divorces in Harlan for 20 years. Mrs. Dunmore, Phil said slowly. He folded his hands together. I am obligated to ask you this one final time. Are you absolutely certain you do not want to reopen any of these clauses? This mediation is your absolute last opportunity before we stand in front of the judge next week. Greta did not even turn her head to look at me. My client has confirmed the terms, Mr. Stanger. Phil shifted his gaze from Greta back to me. His brow furrowed just a fraction of an inch. He was a smart man, and I could tell he felt a missing piece in the room. He simply had no idea what shape that missing piece took. Very well, Phil finally said, leaning back in his chair. Wade let out a short, heavy breath. He did not look at me. He kept his eyes on the plastic water pitcher. So we are finished here. We are just waiting for the judge to officially sign off, the mediator confirmed, tapping her pen against her clipboard. The formal hearing is scheduled for next Friday morning. My husband stood up from the table. He reached over and shook his lawyer's hand. A quick white smile flashed across his face. It was the smile of a man who had just closed a highly profitable business deal. He finally turned and looked at me. It was the very first time he had met my eyes during the entire hour we sat in that windowless room. I think this is the best way for everyone, Wade said. I think so too, I replied. I watched him button his suit jacket. He looked at me like he was handing me a generous gift. He was keeping the house where I had painted the kitchen walls. He was keeping the vehicle I drove every single day to the hospital. He was keeping the bank accounts we had both poured our paychecks into for years. He was tossing me the scraps of our life, and he genuinely believed his actions were charitable. I stood up, pushed my chair under the table, and walked out of the room before he could take another breath. The next afternoon, Donna carried a plastic tray across the hospital cafeteria. The bright overhead lights hummed a low, constant tune above the rows of Formica tables. The large room smelled heavily of industrial floor cleaner and the chicken noodle soup simmering over at the hot bar. Outside the wide windows, a thin layer of dirty winter snow was finally beginning to melt into the dark pavement. My best friend set her tray down across from me. She slid a foil-wrapped turkey sandwich across the table. She sat down, folded her paper napkin into a neat square, and waited. She did not ask a single question. She just watched my face. It is finally finished, I told her. You do not sound surprised, Donna noted. He signed everything exactly as we drew it up, I said. Donna picked up her plastic fork. You have been entirely too steady since this whole mess started, Faye. People who are this steady usually have a very specific reason. I looked down at the foil wrapper of my sandwich. I peeled back the shiny silver edge. Then I told her the truth. I did not give her every single legal detail, but I gave her enough. I explained the generation skipping trust my father had set up for Levi. I told her about the 85 acres up in Letcher County. I mentioned the corporate developers from Appalachian Solar Partners. I laid out the timeline for the final court hearing next Friday. Donna stopped moving. She listened to every single word without interrupting me once. Her facial expressions shifted slowly piece by piece. First, her eyebrows pulled together in worry. Then her eyes widened in understanding. Finally, her posture straightened into something that looked remarkably like deep respect. She set her plastic fork down on her napkin. "When exactly did Mr. Earl arrange all of this?" Donna asked in a hushed whisper. "Right after Levi was born," I answered. "Did your father know what kind of man Wade really was before you even figured it out?" "My father did not know anything specific about Wade," I explained. "He just knew that his land needed to be passed down the right way. He wanted it protected." Donna picked up a potato chip from her tray and studied it. "Does Wade have any idea?" "No," I said. "Does his hotshot lawyer?" "No, not a clue," I confirmed. A long, thick silence fell between us. The hospital public address system chimed overhead, calling a doctor to the emergency floor. The clatter of plastic trays echoed from the dish return station. Donna tossed the potato chip back onto her plate. "Faye." "What?" I asked. "I need you to know something right now," she said. She leaned across the table. "I have wanted to pour a gallon of industrial paint remover over the hood of his precious truck for the last 3 months. But I am very glad I did not do it, because what you are doing to him is so much better." I let out a small, quiet laugh. I took a bite of the turkey sandwich. It tasted like cardboard, but I forced myself to swallow it anyway. "How is Levi holding up?" Donna asked gently. "Does the boy know what is happening?" "He knows the farm belongs to him," I said. "That is all he needs to know right now." Donna nodded slowly. "That is plenty." "Do not come to the courthouse next Friday," I told her. "Why not?" Donna asked, her voice rising slightly. "I want to be there." "Because," I said, pointing a finger at her, "I do not want you to have to restrain yourself when Wade's lawyer realizes what just happened to his case." Donna stared up at the acoustic ceiling tiles for 3 long seconds. She let out a heavy sigh. "Fine, okay. I will stay here and wait for your phone call the second you walk out of those doors." On Friday evening, exactly 1 week before the judge would strike his gavel, I drove down my old street. I did not plan to stop. I only needed to drive past the neighborhood on my way to the grocery store. The asphalt was slick from a recent winter drizzle. I slowed the car to a crawl as I approached the property line. The exterior lights of the house were burning bright. A warm golden glow spilled out from the kitchen windows, cutting through the dark, cold evening. A compact red car sat parked perfectly in the center of the concrete driveway. I eased my foot onto the brake pedal. My car rolled to a silent stop against the curb. I left the engine idling. My hands gripped the cold steering wheel. A woman's voice carried through the glass window panes. It was a light, clear laugh. I did not step out of my vehicle. I just sat in the driver's seat and watched. I was checking my own internal temperature. I waited for the sharp, familiar ache of betrayal to hit my ribs. I waited for the rush of heat to flush my face. Neither sensation arrived. The pain had completely changed its shape. Through the lit window, I could see Tricia standing by the kitchen island. She was holding a wine glass. She tipped her head back and laughed again. Wade stepped into the frame holding a bottle. He smiled widely and poured more wine into her glass. They were standing inside the kitchen. I had spent 2 full days painting back in 2019. I remembered the exact smell of that paint. I remembered how thick the summer humidity was while I stood on a stepladder, carefully brushing bright yellow around the window frames. Levi had been growing inside my belly at the time. Wade had walked in, looked at the walls, and told me it looked better. Then he had walked into the living room and never mentioned the paint again. I watched the two of them moving around the space like they had owned it their entire lives. The question running through my mind was not whether I had made a mistake by giving the house away. The question was whether I could maintain this exact level of cold absolute clarity when I sat in the courtroom next week and watched him sign his name one final time. I had married Wade in June of 2009. There were exactly 15 people sitting in the wooden pews of the small community church. I had wanted a tiny ceremony. My father had worn a stiff blue button-down shirt. He only ever wore that specific shirt for weddings and funerals. I had stood at the altar and truly believed Wade would be the man standing beside me when the world grew heavy. He was perfectly fine standing beside me when the world was easy, but when things actually got hard, he vanished. When my father was dying in a hospital bed, Wade was always working late. When I was pulling double shifts at the medical center to cover our rising bills, Wade needed time with his friends to decompress. When Levi was sick with a severe chest infection for an entire month, my husband slept in the spare room so his rest would not be disturbed. He did not physically pack his bags and leave during those years. He simply never saw any reason to actually be present. And that was a fundamental flaw you could not teach a grown man how to fix. Wade walked past the kitchen window again. He never once looked outside. He had no idea my car was parked 20 feet away in the shadows. My phone vibrated violently against the center console. I reached down and picked it up. The caller identification showed Norman Hast's office number. I pressed the phone to my ear. I spoke with the solar company representative, Norman said, without any introduction. I told Mr. Fitch he does not need to do a single thing except sit perfectly still until you call his name. Did he understand? I asked, keeping my eyes on the yellow kitchen window. He understood completely, Norman confirmed. He told me he has sat through dozens of contentious settlement hearings in his career. He knows exactly how to remain invisible in a courtroom. That is good, I said. A brief pause hung on the line. I heard the faint rustle of paper from Norman's end. Are you holding up all right, Faye? The older man asked. I looked up at my rearview mirror. The reflection of the warm golden lights from Wade's house glowed in the small rectangle of glass. I am fine, I told him. You want me there next Friday, correct? Norman asked. You have to be there, I insisted. You are the only person walking into that room who knows the entire story from beginning to end. I will see you Friday, Norman promised. I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. I shifted the car into drive and pressed my foot down on the gas pedal. The tires hissed against the wet pavement as I drove away. I did not look back in the rearview mirror a second time. The final hearing was exactly 7 days away. My husband was drinking wine and eating dinner in the bright yellow kitchen I had built for my family. I was driving back to a cramped 2-bedroom apartment that overlooked a cracked parking lot. I would not have traded places with him for anything in the world. Wade thought he had already crossed the finish line. He thought the war was over, and he was standing on the victor's podium. He did not realize I had spent the last 3 weeks quietly building a brand new battlefield, and he was about to step directly onto the landmines. I would find out later exactly how the fragile glass began to crack. Holland is a small town tucked deep into the mountains. Secrets do not survive very long when tired men sit around wooden tables drinking cheap draft beer after a long shift. It happened on Monday evening. This was exactly 4 days before Wade and I were scheduled to stand in front of the judge. Wade was sitting in a dimly lit tavern located just off the main highway. The air inside the bar smelled heavily of stale alcohol, fried chicken wings, and old floor wax. A classic country music song played from a neon jukebox in the back corner. The slow guitar notes mixed with the sharp hollow clack of billiard balls striking each other. Wade was laughing with a group of local construction workers. One of those men was Bobby Crane. Bobby worked as a land surveyor for the county. He did not know he was holding a lit match over a massive pool of gasoline when he started talking. Bobby took a long swallow from his frosted glass and leaned forward against the table. He mentioned a massive new corporate solar project buying up acres of land up in Letcher County. He specifically mentioned a large plot situated near Route 7. He called the property Corbett Ridge. He noted that the developers were offering a ridiculous amount of money to clear the area. Wade set his wet glass down on the sticky wooden table. The name Corbett echoed loudly in his head. My father was Earl Corbett. I had grown up in Letcher County. The puzzle pieces suddenly slammed together in my husband's mind. Wade excused himself from the loud table. He pushed his chair back, walked through the heavy wooden front doors, and stepped out into the freezing parking lot. It was 9 o'clock at night. The bitter winter wind whipped against his canvas work jacket, but he did not feel the cold. He pulled his cell phone from his pocket and dialed Phil Stanger. His attorney answered on the third ring. Wade demanded that Phil check the county property records immediately. Phil was sitting at his home office desk. He put his phone on speaker and typed the requested information into the county database. The line stayed quiet for several long minutes, filled only by the rapid clicking of a plastic keyboard. Then the typing stopped completely. Phil cleared his throat. He explained that he found a trust filed at the courthouse. It was a generation-skipping trust. The sole beneficiary was Levi Dunmore. Wade asked what that legal jargon actually meant. Phil let out a slow breath. He explained that the property was technically not a marital asset. The land never belonged to me, which meant it was completely protected from the impending divorce settlement. Wade stood in the cold parking lot and asked who controlled the trust account. Phil paused. His voice dropped to a low, incredibly careful whisper. He explained that the trustee was the legal guardian of the child. Then the seasoned lawyer reminded Wade about the voluntary parental custody waiver he had enthusiastically signed just a few days prior. The phone line went dead silent. Wade realized he had happily surrendered all his legal rights to his son. He had surrendered absolute control of a massive fortune simply because he did not want to be inconvenienced by raising a little boy. At 8 o'clock the next morning, my lawyer was sitting at her desk with a steaming cup of black coffee. Her office phone rang. Phil Stanger was on the other end. Greta would tell me later that Phil sounded unusually tense. He did not waste time with morning pleasantries. Phil announced that his client wanted to modify the custody agreement. Greta sat perfectly still in her leather chair. She kept her voice entirely flat. She reminded Phil that Wade had signed the papers voluntarily in front of legal witnesses. He had been asked twice if he was sure. He had answered yes, both times. Phil tried to build a fragile excuse out of thin air. He claimed Wade had not fully understood the legal consequences of his signature. Phil insisted his client desperately wanted to be a present father. He wanted joint custody of Levi. Greta knew exactly what was happening. She knew Wade was lying through his teeth. The man had suddenly developed a deep burning desire for fatherhood the exact moment he realized his son came attached to 85 acres of extremely valuable land. She did not raise her voice. She simply told Phil that sudden regret was not a valid legal reason to reopen a signed agreement. Phil countered by stating they would file a formal motion with the judge before the deadline. Greta promised to deliver the message to her client. She hung up the phone and immediately dialed my cell number. The bright fluorescent lights in the hospital hallway buzzed loudly above my head. It was Tuesday morning, right in the middle of my busy nursing shift. I was pushing a heavy metal medication cart back toward the main nursing station. The hard rubber wheels squeaked against the freshly polished linoleum floor. The public address system chimed twice, calling a respiratory therapist to the third floor. The air smelled strongly of bleach, rubbing alcohol, and clean cotton linens. My phone vibrated violently against my hip inside my scrub pocket. I pulled the device out and saw Greta Hollins flashing on the bright screen. I steered the metal cart into a quiet alcove near the janitorial supply closet. I turned my face toward the blank white wall and pressed the phone to my ear. Greta delivered the facts quickly and precisely, much like a surgeon, making an initial incision. Wade wanted to modify the custody arrangement. Phil claimed his client had not understood the paperwork. Phil claimed Wade truly wanted Levi in his life. I listened to the steady rhythm of her voice. I did not interrupt her. I did not gasp or raise my voice. I just stared at the glossy white paint on the wall. What are his actual chances of success? I asked. My throat felt incredibly dry. Greta let out a heavy sigh that crackled through the phone speaker. She explained that his chances were quite low, however they were not zero. Judge Garrett might decide to grant Wade a hearing just to listen to his side of the story. The family court system generally preferred to give parents every possible opportunity to be involved. If the judge allowed the modification motion to proceed, our Friday court date would be officially postponed. It could easily be delayed for several weeks while the court investigated the new claims. I closed my eyes. The noise of the busy hospital faded into the background, and the solar developer Greta paused before answering. Their strict deadline to finalize the land purchase is the end of April. If the divorce hearing is delayed, you will not be granted your official trustee authority in time. You will not have the legal right to sign their contract. They will pull the offer entirely and move on to a different property. I gripped the metal handle of the medication cart until my knuckles turned completely white. The cold reality of the situation poured over me like freezing water. It was not a dramatic screaming kind of panic. It was a sudden suffocating weight pressing down on my chest. Wade had figured out the puzzle. He knew about the land. He was trying to claw back the custody rights he had so easily tossed away just a few days ago. He was not doing it because he missed hearing Levi laugh in the morning. He was not doing it because he wanted to read his son a bedtime story or teach him how to throw a baseball. He was treating our 8-year-old child like a physical key to unlock a massive bank vault. I did not speak for 15 long seconds. Greta knew better than to interrupt a client while they were processing terrible news. The hospital hallway continued to hum all around me. Other nurses walked past the alcove, their soft shoes tapping against the floor. A patient coughed violently in a nearby room. "Faye, I need to know exactly what you want to do," Greta finally said. I opened my eyes and looked at the blank wall. There was absolutely nothing written there to help me. "When do they have to file the motion?" I asked. "Before 5 o'clock tomorrow evening if they want to halt the Friday hearing," Greta replied. I ran a free hand through my hair. "Can you file a legal objection to his motion?" "I can, and I absolutely will," Greta assured me. "But Faye, you need to understand the tremendous risk. Even if we fight the motion, the judge will still have to review it on his desk. The delay will happen no matter what we do. We will miss the solar company's deadline. They will walk away." Wade had abandoned his son for months. He had barely spoken to the boy since he moved his new girlfriend into our house. He had treated Levi like an inconvenient piece of furniture he left behind during a move. And now he was willing to drag his own child through a messy custody battle just to get his hands on a corporate buyout. I looked down at my worn nursing shoes. A quiet burning resolve settled in the pit of my stomach. "Greta," I said softly. "Yes," she answered. "Has Wade ever visited Levi since we officially separated?" I asked. "Do you have a record of exactly how many times he has come to see his son?" The phone line remained quiet for a moment. "I do not have a formal record of that in my files." "I do," I told her. "I told my lawyer I needed to speak with Norman Hess tonight as soon as my shift ended. I promised to meet her at her office first thing tomorrow morning." I hung up the phone before she could ask any more questions. I stood alone in the bright hospital alcove. The public address system chimed again. The air conditioner rattled faintly behind the ceiling vent. The entire world was spinning slightly off its axis, but I planted my feet firmly on the linoleum floor. Wade thought he could just snap his fingers and demand his son back after completely ignoring him. He thought he was playing a clever game with property rights and legal loopholes. I pushed the heavy medication cart out of the quiet alcove and rode it back toward the busy nursing station. I checked the small clock on the wall. It was Tuesday afternoon. The legal deadline was tomorrow at 5 o'clock. The final hearing was on Friday. I smoothed down the front of my blue scrubs, took a deep breath of the sterile hospital air, and walked back into the chaos of my shift. Tonight, I was going to sit in Norman Hast's office, and after that I was going to drive up into the cold hills to find a specific piece of paper I had left sitting on a wooden kitchen table 3 years ago. Norman Hast left the lights on in his law office. I arrived at 8 o'clock on Tuesday evening, straight from the hospital after finishing my shift. The downtown Harlem streets were mostly empty. A few yellow street lamps cast long shadows across the wet pavement. I parked my car against the curb and pushed through the heavy glass door of his building. The office felt much warmer at night. Norman had turned off the harsh overhead fluorescent tubes. A single brass desk lamp provided a pool of warm, concentrated light across his cluttered mahogany desk. The heavy wooden wall clock ticked in a slow, even rhythm. Outside the dusty window, a solitary pickup truck rumbled down the street and faded into the distance. Norman was sitting in his large leather chair. He did not look surprised to see me. "I know," Norman said quietly before I even took a seat. "Phil Stanger called me last night. Wade has figured out the shape of the trust." I unzipped my winter coat and sat down in the wooden chair across from him. "My lawyer said they have until 5 o'clock tomorrow evening to file a formal motion. Wade wants to delay the hearing and fight for joint custody." Norman folded his hands on top of the green folder. "Do you have the record of his visitation?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out my cell phone. I had already opened the Notes application. I unlocked the screen and placed the device flat on the desk, sliding it into the pool of yellow light. A short, precise list of dates filled the screen. Norman put on his wire-rimmed glasses. He leaned forward and read the screen in complete silence. The ticking of the wall clock seemed to grow louder in the small room. Since the day you formally separated 11 weeks ago, Norman began looking up from the phone. How many times has Wade driven over to see Levi? 2 times, I answered. And both of those visits only happened because I sent him multiple text messages reminding him to come. Did he ever drive to the elementary school to pick Levi up? 0 times, I said. How many phone calls? Norman asked. 3, I told him. In 11 weeks, he has spoken to his son on the phone exactly 3 times. Norman pushed the phone back across the desk toward me. He took off his glasses and let them hang from the dark cord around his neck. Mrs. Dunmore, Norman said, his voice dropping to a very steady, comforting register. Judge Garrett and I have known each other for a very long time. He knows that I do not waste the court's time with frivolous arguments. If Phil Stanger actually files a motion to modify custody tomorrow, I will immediately file a counter-declaration attaching your exact visitation record. That list of dates is entirely sufficient for Garrett to reject their motion outright without even granting them a formal hearing. A man who completely ignores his own child, 9 times out of 10, does not have the legal standing to suddenly claim he desperately needs shared custody. I picked up my phone. The metal edge felt warm from the desk lamp. There is one more thing, Norman added. His tone shifted. It softened, losing the sharp edge of a practicing attorney. The cardboard shoebox sitting on the table at the farm. Have you opened your father's envelope yet? No, I admitted. Not yet. Earl specifically asked me to remind you about it, Norman told me. He gave me a very strict instruction before he passed. He said I needed to remind Faye to read it exactly when she needed it. I firmly believe right now is that time. I did not answer him. I just looked at the dark green folder resting on his desk. I have absolutely no idea what is written on that paper, Norman said gently. That was a private letter from your father to you. I left the law office and got back into my car. I did not drive toward my apartment. I steered my vehicle north, taking the winding highway out of Harlan and crossing over the county line. The drive to Letcher County took 35 minutes. The night was pitch black. There was no moon in the sky. My bright headlights cut through the thick winter darkness, illuminating the bare twisting branches of the trees lining the shoulder of the road. The pavement eventually turned into a narrow dirt lane. Red clay and loose gravel crunched loudly beneath my tires. The heater blew warm air against my frozen hands, but I still felt a deep chill settling into my bones. I pulled up to the Corbett Ridge farmhouse. It sat completely dark against the shadow of the hillside. No one had lived inside those wooden walls since my father died 3 years ago. I turned off the engine. The sudden silence of the country night was heavy and thick. I stepped out of the car. The biting February wind whipped my hair across my face. A few winter crickets chirped somewhere in the dry brush. I walked up the creaky wooden steps and retrieved the heavy brass key from my coat pocket. The metal was freezing. I pushed the key into the lock and turned it. The door hinges let out a long dry groan as I stepped inside the dark house. The air inside the farmhouse was actually colder than the air outside. It had been sealed up tight for months. The space smelled like old cedar planks, settling dust, and the lingering scent of my father's heavy flannel work shirts. I did not reach for the light switch. I knew exactly where every single piece of furniture was placed. I could navigate these rooms with my eyes closed. I walked past the old iron wood stove he used to fire up every single morning. I walked past the wooden rocking chair where he used to sit and watch the rain wash over the valley. I stopped at the scarred kitchen table. The faded cardboard shoebox was still sitting right in the center. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The harsh white beam cut through the darkness, casting long, strange shadows against the floral wallpaper. I set the phone face up on the edge of the table so the light bounced off the ceiling. I sat down in my father's chair. My fingers traced the deep gouges in the wood. Then I reached forward and pulled the lid off the shoebox. I moved the ancient vehicle registrations aside. I pushed past the faded photographs of my mother. At the very bottom, resting against the cardboard base, was a sealed white envelope. My name was written across the front in his sharp, slanted handwriting. I picked it up. The paper felt thick and brittle. I slid my thumb under the sealed flap and tore it open. The sound of ripping paper echoed loudly in the empty kitchen. I pulled out a single sheet of lined notebook paper. The date written at the top right corner was the exact day Levi had been born. I held the paper under the glow of the phone light and began to read. Faye, I am not very good at talking. You already know that about me. I did not set up this legal trust because I do not trust you. I set it up because I trust you enough to know you will do the exact right thing when the time finally comes, even if nobody is standing there telling you what that thing is. You have known what land actually means since you were a little girl walking barefoot in the creek. It is not just money in a bank. It is not a shiny thing you trade away for something else. It is the solid place you stand when you have absolutely nowhere else left to stand. This new baby boy, I do not even know who he is yet. I do not know what kind of man he will grow up to be, but I know for a fact he will need a safe place to stand in this world. You will hold that ground for him. I know you will hold it. Do not waste time thanking me. Just do not walk away. Dad. I read the short letter quickly the first time. Then I went back to the top and read every single word a second time. I lowered the paper to the table and stared at his slanted handwriting. You will hold that ground for him. He did not write that I would win the fight. He did not write that I would be perfectly fine. He just asked me not to walk away. For 3 long years, I had held this property in absolute secret. I had not kept it hidden because Norman asked me to. I had kept it hidden because Levi slept on his side every single night with a smooth river stone clutched tight in his small fist. I held it because my 8-year-old son had taped a picture of a white oak tree to his bedroom wall and named the farm Corbett Ridge before he even knew he owned the dirt. There are certain things you simply cannot explain using a legal trust document or a corporate developer offer. Wade wanted Levi right now because Wade wanted the money. Wade treated my son like a bargaining chip. But this old farmhouse, the rusted fences, the creek, the trees, this was Levi's place. And I was standing right here protecting the gate. I folded the piece of lined paper in half. I did not put it back into the cardboard box. I slid it deep into the breast pocket of my coat right over my chest. I stood up and walked back out the front door. I locked the deadbolt behind me and stepped out into the freezing front yard. The night was entirely still. I looked toward the western ridge. The bright orange survey stakes were completely swallowed by the darkness. I could not see a single trace of them, but I knew exactly where they were planted in the frozen earth. My court date was Friday morning, 3 days away. I pulled my coat tighter around my shoulders, walked back to my car, and drove down the mountain. On Wednesday afternoon, I sat in a leather chair in Greta Holland's office. The digital clock on her desk read 4:59. The deadline for Wade to file a motion to halt the proceedings was exactly 5 o'clock. Greta sat behind her computer monitor. She was refreshing the county court database every 30 seconds. The room smelled like fresh printer toner and strong coffee. I watched the digital numbers shift. 5 o'clock, 5:01, 5:02. The heavy desk phone suddenly rang. The loud shrill made me flinch. Greta picked up the receiver. Hollins, she answered. She listened for about 20 seconds. Her eyes locked onto mine across the desk. She gave a sharp, definitive nod. I understand, Phil Greta said into the phone. We will see you and your client on Friday morning as originally scheduled. She placed the receiver gently back onto the cradle. She leaned back in her chair and let out a very long, very slow breath. He backed down, Greta announced. He knows he will lose in front of the judge. Phil Stanger is a highly experienced attorney. He knows exactly when he should stop wasting his client's money. Wade is not filing the motion. I felt the tension drain out of my shoulders. It was not the soaring thrill of a grand victory. It was the bone-deep exhaustion of a runner who had just sprinted for miles, only to realize the finish line was finally under her feet. Absolutely nothing had changed from our original plan. Friday would happen exactly as we designed it. Do you need me to prepare anything else for you? I asked quietly. No, Greta told me. You have done absolutely everything I need. I grabbed my purse from the floor and prepared to stand up. Faye, Greta said. Her voice stopped me. I want to say something to you. I really need to say it out loud. Go ahead, I told her. When you first walked into my office and told me to give him the house and the savings accounts, I honestly thought you were making the biggest mistake of your entire life. I know you did, I said. Greta looked down at her hands. I do not think that anymore. We let the quiet truth settle over the room. The printer in the hallway hummed to life, churning out fresh documents. Thank you, Greta, I said. Have a good night. I will see you on Friday. I drove back to my apartment complex as the sun began to set. When I unlocked the front door and walked inside, the living room was bathed in the soft yellow glow of a single-floor lamp. The television was completely dark. Levi was sitting on the center cushion of the sofa. He was wearing his blue cotton pajamas. His hair was sticking up on one side where he had obviously been lying down, but he had gotten out of bed. He was staring blankly at the far wall. The apartment smelled like the clean lavender soap I used for his evening baths. You are not asleep yet, I asked, dropping my keys into the bowl by the door. Levi slowly shook his head. He looked over at me, then looked down at his small hands resting in his lap. He was rolling the smooth river stone between his fingers, Mom, Levi whispered. I walked over and sat down right next to him on the worn fabric cushion. What is it, buddy? That night, Levi started. His voice was incredibly small, fragile, as thin glass. The night Dad was talking to you in the kitchen about the house, I was standing up on the dark stairs. I know you were, I told him. Levi looked up at me. His brown eyes were wide with genuine surprise. You knew I was there. I heard you step on the floorboard, I said. You are not mad at me for sneaking out of bed, he asked. I could never be mad at you for that, I promised. Levi fell quiet again. He pressed his lips together in a tight, thin line. It was the exact expression he always made when he was trying to choose a very difficult word, Mom, Levi said. He stopped rolling the stone. Does Dad actually want me? The question hung in the air between us. It was the exact question I had been dreading since that terrible night in the kitchen. I did not want to answer it because there was no possible answer that would not cause him pain. I sat with his words for a long minute. Levi did not rush me. He was an 8-year-old boy who already knew how to sit quietly and wait for the truth. The awful reality was that I did not know the answer. I did not know how Wade loved his son or if he even loved him at all. I knew my husband had called his boy a thing. I knew he had only bothered to see him twice in almost 3 months. But stating those harsh facts was not what an 8-year-old child needed to hear in the middle of the night. Your dad loves you in the exact way he knows how to love, I finally said. I kept my voice steady and completely honest. His way is not the best way. His way is actually very broken, but it is the only way he has. Levi processed my words slowly. He looked down at the stone again. Am I enough, Mom? Levi asked softly. Am I enough for you? I reached out and placed my hand over his small fingers. You are absolutely everything I told him. It was not a flowery, dramatic speech. It was the simple, grounded truth. Levi gave a small nod. He slipped the river stone into the pocket of his pajama pants. He stood up from the sofa and leaned forward, wrapping his arms around my neck. He gave me a quick, firm hug. It was the strong hug of a growing boy, not a toddler. Then he pulled away, turned around, and walked silently down the hallway to his bedroom. I stayed on the sofa by myself. The yellow lamp cast long shadows across the empty living room. I leaned my head back against the cushion and closed my eyes. Friday was only 1 day away. I stood up, turned off the lamp, and went to my own bed. For the first time since Wade placed that yellow legal pad on my kitchen counter, I closed my eyes and slept through the entire night. The marble floor of the Harlan County Courthouse echoed with the sharp clack of hard leather shoes. It was Friday morning. The air inside the wide hallway smelled distinctly of old legal volumes, floor wax, and the burnt coffee sitting in a glass pot near the clerk's station. Tall windows lined the eastern wall. The bright February sunlight cut through the glass, casting long pale rectangles across the stone floor. It was a rare sunny day for the middle of winter. I wore a navy blue blazer I had purchased last autumn for a hospital fundraiser I never ended up attending. I pulled my hair back into a tight clasp. I wore no jewelry except for the plain silver ring my father had given me when I graduated from nursing school. Norman Hast arrived before I did. He was standing near the heavy wooden doors of courtroom number 2. He held the dark green folder securely under his left arm. Greta Holland stood right next to him. She was flipping through her own stack of crisp white documents one final time. "Is Mr. Fitch already inside?" I asked as I walked up to them. "He is," Norman confirmed in a low voice. "He knows to sit completely still in the back row until I call his name. He has watched enough of these proceedings to know exactly how to blend into the wooden benches." Greta closed her file folder and looked toward the narrow glass window set into the courtroom door. Phil Stanger and Wade are already sitting at their table. "Wade looks incredibly confident this morning." She paused and tilted her head slightly. "Actually, no. He looks like a man who is trying very hard to appear confident. He always tries to look that way," I told her. Greta smoothed the front of her suit jacket. "Are you ready for this, Faye?" I looked at Norman. "How long have you been ready for this day?" Norman offered a very small, quiet smile. "I have been ready since the Tuesday morning Earl Corbett knocked on my office door back in 2015. He sat in my leather chair and told me he needed to make absolutely sure his future grandchild would always have a solid place to stand." We pushed open the heavy wooden doors and walked into the room. The Harlan County courtroom was small. It did not look like the grand imposing chambers you see on television. There were exactly 12 rows of worn wooden benches for the public gallery. Only 2 people were sitting in those seats. An older woman was taking shorthand notes in the second row, likely a reporter for the local weekly paper, and in the very back row, sitting perfectly still on the far left side, was Del Fitch. The 50-year-old solar executive wore a dark blue suit. A slim leather briefcase rested flat across his knees. He looked like an ordinary citizen waiting for a traffic dispute. Nobody paid him any attention. The room smelled like dry air and wood polish. The tired ventilation system hummed a low constant note from the ceiling grills. Faint sounds of highway traffic bled through the thick exterior walls. Wade sat at the petitioner table. Phil Stanger sat directly to his right. I walked to the respondent table with Greta and Norman and took my seat. The solid wooden chair felt hard and unforgiving beneath me. I rested my hands on the smooth laminate tabletop. I looked across the aisle. Wade was staring straight ahead at the judge's empty bench. The muscle in his jaw flexed and released in a tight rhythm. He did not turn his head to look at me. Judge Garrett walked into the room through a side door. He was a stern-looking man with thinning white hair and heavy robes. He sat down, adjusted his microphone, and opened the thick file resting in front of him. He picked up his pen. The scratching sound of the metal tip against the paper filled the quiet room. The judge began to read the terms of the settlement. He verified the names. He confirmed that both parties had reviewed the distribution of assets. He asked if there were any final objections to the drafted agreement before he made it permanent. Phil Stanger stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket. "Your Honor," Phil began, "we have no formal objections to the distribution of physical property or financial accounts. However, we would like to request that the official record reflect a specific statement. Mr. Wade Dunmore wishes to express his deep desire to maintain contact with his son through a voluntary informal arrangement that is not strictly bound by this settlement." Judge Garrett peered over the top of his reading glasses. "Is this simply an informal statement for the court reporter, or are you filing a formal motion to modify the custody agreement, Mr. Stanger?" "It is merely an informal statement, Your Honor," Phil replied smoothly. Judge Garrett gave a short nod. "The statement is noted for the record. Any official changes to the custody arrangement will require a separate petition filed with this court." He shifted his gaze across the aisle. "Mrs. Dunmore, does your counsel wish to respond to that statement?" Greta stood up immediately. Her posture was flawless. "Our client accepts the informal statement," Greta said. Her voice was pure ice. "We will gladly facilitate contact strictly according to the comfort level of Levi Dunmore and according to Mr. Wade Dunmore's actual ability to demonstrate a consistent commitment. We will be maintaining a detailed record of all attempted contact moving forward. Wade finally turned his head. He looked straight at me. His eyes were dark and narrow. I kept my gaze fixed on the American flag standing in the corner of the room. I did not give him the satisfaction of looking back. Judge Garrett continued down the list. He read every single clause out loud. The transfer of the deed for the house, the titles for the truck and the work van, the division of the joint savings. Then he read the voluntary custody waiver. He confirmed that sole legal and physical custody of Levi Dunmore was granted exclusively to the mother. I watched Wade pick up his pen. He signed his name on the final 3 copies resting in front of him. He pressed down hard. Each stroke of the pen was another door swinging firmly shut. Judge Garrett collected the papers. Are there any other marital assets that need to be addressed before I finalize this order? We have nothing further, Phil stated. Judge Garrett looked toward our table. Norman Haas stood up. He moved very slowly. He picked up the dark green folder from the table. Your Honor, Norman said. His voice carried a deep resonant authority. I am Norman Haas. I represent the trust estate of the late Mr. Earl Corbett. I need to submit a specific document into the official record this morning. It is required to clarify the trustee status resulting directly from the custody order you just confirmed. Judge Garrett stopped moving his pen. Phil Stanger looked up, his brow furrowing. Wade turned his head toward our table. I did not move a single inch. This document is the Corbett Family Generation Skipping Trust, Norman explained to the quiet room. It was established in 2015. The sole beneficiary of this trust is Levi Dunmore. Norman walked forward and placed the heavy folder onto the clerk's desk. The primary asset held within this trust is 85 acres of land located in Letcher County, Norman continued. According to the specific legal terms drafted by the grantor, the sole trustee of this estate is the primary legal guardian of the beneficiary. Phil Stanger shot up from his chair. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. This property is absolutely not related to the marital settlement agreement. Sit down, Mr. Stanger, Judge Garrett commanded sharply. He pulled the green folder toward him and opened it. He looked back down at Norman. Continue, Mr. Haas. With the voluntary custody waiver signed by Mr. Wade Dunmore and confirmed by this court 2 minutes ago, Norman said, his voice ringing crystal clear, the sole legal guardian of Levi Dunmore is now Mrs. Faye Dunmore. Therefore, Mrs. Dunmore is the exclusive trustee of this asset. Norman paused. He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a single sheet of heavy corporate paper. For the court's awareness, Norman added the trust asset includes all mineral rights, timber rights, and surface rights of the 85 acres. It also currently holds a pending solar easement offer from Appalachian Solar Partners. Norman walked forward and placed the second paper onto the clerk's desk. The property is currently valued at $340,000 for a full corporate purchase or $85,000 for a basic surface easement. The silence inside the courtroom was absolute. It was so quiet, I could hear the second hand ticking on the wall clock. Del Fitch sat in the back row and quietly opened his leather briefcase. Judge Garrett read the corporate offer letter. Phil Stanger stared at the piece of paper on the clerk's desk. His face lost all its color. He looked like a man who had been confidently doing a complex math equation for 6 months, only to realize he had forgotten a zero on the very first line. Wade turned slowly toward his attorney. His mouth opened slightly. No sound came out. He looked back at me. He looked at Norman. He looked at the judge. He was desperately trying to process the words $340,000. Wade had signed away his son to keep a suburban house with a mortgage. In doing so, he had handed me total control over a small fortune. He was staring at me now. I did not need to meet his eyes. My father had left that land to Levi. My 8-year-old son had named it Corbett Ridge. I did not do this to win a bitter divorce game. I did not do this to humiliate a man in public. I did it because my son needed his ground protected, and I was the person standing at the gate. Judge Garrett looked over the top of his glasses at the petitioner table. Mr. Stanger, do you have any legal commentary regarding this trust document? Phil gripped the edge of his table. Your Honor, my client and I need adequate time to review these new documents. There is nothing for you to review regarding the marital settlement, Judge Garrett stated firmly. This trust was established well before the marriage. It was funded exclusively by the separate property of the grantor. The asset falls entirely outside the jurisdiction of your divorce proceedings. The judge picked up his wooden gavel. He tapped it lightly against the sound block. The settlement agreement is confirmed and finalized, Judge Garrett announced. This court is adjourned. Wade kept his eyes locked on my face. The smug, confident mask he had worn into the building was completely gone. The expression replacing it was not pure anger. It was a hollow, sinking realization. He finally understood exactly what he had thrown away. I gathered my purse and stood up from the hard wooden chair. I did not rush. Norman leaned close to my ear. Would you like me to bring Mr. Fitch out to the parking lot now? Yes, please, I replied. 15 minutes later, I stood in the cold wind of the courthouse parking lot. The weak February sun offered very little warmth. The asphalt beneath my shoes was cracked and uneven. There were only 4 vehicles parked in the small side lot. I rested the heavy corporate letter of intent against the cold metal trunk of Norman's sedan. I clicked my pen and signed my name on the bottom line. It took exactly 8 minutes to finalize a deal that would alter the rest of my life. Dale Fitch stood across from me, his coat collar pulled up against the biting wind. Mrs. Dunmore, our crews will begin the official topographic surveys by the first week of March. Once this project is fully completed, your family farm will generate enough clean electricity to power roughly 2,000 homes. 2,000 homes, I repeated quietly. The Corbett property sits at the absolute perfect elevation for maximum solar capture, the executive told me. Your father chose a truly excellent piece of land. He chose it because he knew how to look at the dirt, I said. I handed the signed paperwork back to him. We shook hands. Fitch and Norman walked toward the front of the courthouse to discuss the remaining corporate logistics. Greta Hollins stepped up beside me. We stood by my car and looked toward the main street. You never told me the complete story, did you? Greta asked. The wind blew a stray strand of hair across her face. I told you exactly what you needed to know to execute your job, I replied. And what happens now? My lawyer asked. Now I am going to drive to the elementary school and pick up my son, I said. Greta looked at me for a long moment. She pulled her coat tighter. Wade stood by the front gates of the courthouse for 15 solid minutes after we walked out. He did not say a single word to Phil. He just stared at the concrete, got into his truck, and drove away. I gave a slow nod. I know. Do you not want to know what he was thinking? Greta asked. I thought about the question carefully. I thought about the man who had packed his bags, claimed his vehicles, and called his own child a thing. No, I told her, not today. The next morning was Saturday. The sun was much brighter than the day before. I drove the winding roads out of Harlan and headed north into Letcher County. The red dirt lane leading up the mountain had completely dried out from the freezing night air. I steered the car around the final bend. The farm appeared just as it always did. The small wooden farmhouse stood quiet against the morning sky. The crooked wooden fence lined the property. The massive white oak tree stretched its bare branches out over the rusted well. Levi unbuckled his seatbelt and pushed the car door open before the tires even crunched to a complete stop. He hit the ground running. His small boots kicked up tiny clouds of red dust as he sprinted toward the wooden fence. I turned off the engine and pulled the keys from the ignition. The heavy brass house key jingled against the plastic car fob. I stepped out into the crisp Appalachian morning. The air was cold, but the direct sunlight carried a genuine trace of warmth. The property smelled like damp earth, dry winter grass, and old pine wood. I walked to the trunk of my car and opened it. The faded cardboard shoebox sat inside. I picked it up and carried it up the creaky wooden steps of the porch. I unlocked the front door and walked into the kitchen. I placed the shoebox directly in the center of the scarred wooden table. I opened the lid, reached into my coat pocket, and pulled out the folded piece of notebook paper. I did not unfold it to read the words again. I simply set the letter gently inside the box and pressed the lid firmly back into place. I left the box resting on the exact spot where my father used to sit every Saturday morning. I walked back outside. Levi was jogging along the fence line. His cheeks were bright red from the cold mountain wind. Mom Levy called out, pointing toward the western ridge. "The orange stakes, there are way more of them out there today. I can see one all the way up at the very top of the hill." "The company is getting the land ready for the project," I told him. "The solar panel project?" Levi asked, walking back toward me. "That is right," I said. Levi stopped in front of me and looked out across the vast rolling hills. "Are we really going to make electricity for other people to use, enough for 2,000 families?" I told him. The 8-year-old boy stood perfectly still. He fell into a deep, genuine thought. He was not just asking questions to hear himself talk. He was trying to build a map of the world in his head. "Did Grandpa Earl know about the solar panels?" Levi asked. "Your grandfather did not know about this specific project," I explained carefully. "But he knew this piece of dirt was incredibly strong. He knew it would be used the right way when the time came." Levi gave a single firm nod. He was entirely satisfied with that answer. He did not need to know about the divorce settlement, the corporate buyout, or the custody waiver. "Corbett Ridge," Levi said proudly. "Corbett Ridge," I echoed. We walked back inside the farmhouse together. I filled the electric kettle and made myself a cup of instant coffee on the old counter. It was not very good coffee, but the warmth felt nice against my palms. Levi climbed up into my father's old wooden rocking chair. The right runner was slightly uneven, and it made a familiar thumping sound against the floorboards as he rocked back and forth. The quiet peace of the house settled around us. Levi stopped rocking. He looked at the small wooden bookshelf standing in the corner of the room. The faded navy blue baseball cap still rested on the top shelf. The flat brim was worn raw. Mom Levy said softly, "Can I take Grandpa's hat back to our apartment? Where do you want to keep it?" I asked. "I want to put it in my bedroom," my son said, "right next to the pictures of the farm." I took a slow sip of my hot coffee. I looked at the old blue hat. My father used to pull that cap firmly onto his head every single Saturday morning before he walked out to check the property line. He would stand by the front gate, look down into the deep valley, and pull the brim low over his eyes. I never knew exactly what he was thinking during those quiet moments. I finally understood it now. He was checking to make sure the ground was still holding firm. He was making sure the foundation had not washed away in the rain. "Do not walk away," the letter had instructed. I had not walked away. I had held the ground. "You can absolutely take the hat," I told my son. We spent the rest of the morning moving slowly around the property. Levi ran down to the creek to look for more smooth stones. I sat on the porch steps and drank my coffee. He asked me how old the great white oak tree was, and I told him the year my father planted the acorn in the dirt. Right before we packed up the car to drive back to town, I walked down to the edge of the front gate. I stood in the exact spot my father used to stand. I looked down into the wide sweeping valley of Letcher County. The winter trees were stripped of their leaves, exposing the raw, jagged spine of the mountains. Far over on the western slope, the long line of neon orange survey stakes stood bright against the dormant winter grass. By March, the heavy machinery would arrive. By June, the metal frames would go up. By December of next year, Corbett Ridge would start pushing power down the mountain to 2,000 families who would never know the name of the man who saved the dirt they relied on. Levi jogged up and stood right beside my leg. He did not ask any more questions. He just stood quietly and looked out at the exact same view I was looking at. I rested my hand gently on my son's shoulder. The battle was completely over. The frantic anxiety of the last 8 months was gone. I did not feel the sudden explosive joy of a fairy tale ending. The feeling inside my chest was much quieter, much heavier, and infinitely more durable. It was the feeling of roots digging deep into the soil. Weight no longer defined the walls of the house I lived in. He no longer dictated the value of the ground I stood on. The power balance was permanently broken. I was no longer standing in an arena fighting for my life. Corbett Ridge was still here, and so were we. Sometimes the greatest victory in your life does not come from screaming the loudest or fighting over every single piece of silver in the drawer. True strength is learning how to accurately measure the actual value of the things you are holding. When someone shows you they care more about the appearance of winning than the reality of what matters, the smartest thing you can do is simply let them pack up their hollow trophies and walk out the door. You do not have to lower yourself to their level or engage in a bitter war that only ends up damaging the children you love the most. True security is never found inside a freshly painted kitchen or a joint checking account. It is found in the quiet, unshakable foundation you build for your family's future. You have to recognize what ground is actually worth defending and hold it firmly without asking anyone for permission. Have you ever surrendered a loud battle because you knew the peace waiting on the other side was worth infinitely more than whatever you were leaving behind? Tell us your story in the comments below, because your quiet resilience might be exactly what another woman needs to hear today.